The 1951 MGM film Royal Wedding contains what may be the most widely known dance that Fred Astaire ever did. The song is called You're All the World to Me, but just about everyone these days refers to it as the ceiling dance or something like that. I'll bet you've seen it, but just to refresh your memory, let's watch the full scene once through without any stops or commentary.
Everywhere that beauty goes, you are. Everywhere an orchid grows, you are. Everything that's young and gay, brighter than a holiday. Everywhere the angels play, you are. You're like Paris in April and May. You're New York on a silvery day, a Swiss Alp as the sun grows fainter. You're Loch Lomond when autumn is the mater. You're moonlight on a night in Capri, and Cape Cod looking out at the sea. You're all places that leave me breathless, and no wonder you're all the world to me.
Now let's take a look at the film history behind this number. And strangely enough, I'm going to start by going all the way back to an Eddie Cantor film from 1934 called Kid Millions. In that movie, young Harold Nicholas of the famous Nicholas Brothers song and dance team sings a song called I Want to Be a Minstrel Man. Here's a little taste.
I want to be a minstrel man. I've always been a minstrel fan. I want to dance just like a dandy and sing that song about my sugar candy. I've learned about those minstrel ways, so bring me back those minstrel days and let me be George M. Cohan. Make me a minstrel man.
The words are different, but it's the same music we just heard. When Burton Lane was hired to write the music for Royal Wedding, he decided to reuse this song. It hadn't really caught on as a hit with the public in 1934, and he must have wanted to give it another chance. This time around, he'd get new lyrics from Alan J. Lerner, who also wrote the screenplay for the film. The song was intended for Judy Garland to sing in Royal Wedding. Unfortunately, Garland was going through a lot of now well-documented personal problems, and MGM ended up firing her and bringing in Jane Powell. They handed this number to Fred, and he asked if he could finally do the gimmick of dancing around a room that had come to him years before at 4 a.m. one morning. He had asked producer Arthur Freed for permission to include it in several of their earlier movies, but it never seemed appropriate or practical. Freed finally relented this time. And I should mention here that, like every other anecdote in the movie business, there's an alternate version. Lyricist Alan J. Lerner said that he was the one to come up with the concept of Fred dancing around a room, saying that he saw it in a dream one night. He insists he mentioned it to producer Freed, and that was the origin of the number. You can believe what you want, but I'm a little more inclined to go with the idea of the dancer coming up with the dance. Whatever the case, the staging got a green light. MGM's set construction team went to work and built a square room inside a giant 20-foot diameter wheel. They called it the Squirrel Cage. I couldn't find any behind-the-scenes pictures of the actual set, so I used AI to generate an image showing a rough idea of the concept. The entire cylinder could rotate 360 degrees, and the hotel room is basically like a shoebox fixed inside the cylinder. The cameraman was strapped down to a board, running the camera and keeping Fred in frame and in focus as he moved around during the dance. So here's what Fred would have looked like to someone standing outside the structure. The set moves around him, placing walls or the ceiling under his feet. The camera rotates with the room, always oriented parallel to the room's floor, so it looks like the floor is steady on the bottom of the frame as we see it. Then Fred's choreography and body control helps sell the illusion of climbing the walls and hanging off the ceiling. Fred worked on the concept and choreography of this dance for 2 months before production shooting began in early July of 1950. And yes, 6-day work weeks were standard back then, so he was working on Saturdays. The sequence wasn't shot until the very end of production in early September. Fred rehearsed the number for 10 days in mid and late August, and that probably gave the construction crew time to iron out the kinks in the set and the mechanics, nail down the proper rotation speed, and figure out how to create weight-bearing versions of the set props. If you're wondering, yes, this is an extraordinary amount of time to spend on preparation for a single dance, even for Astaire, who was known for that kind of thing. Music and singing were pre-recorded in the morning on September 5th, and then Fred did a final set rehearsal that afternoon and the next day. On September 7th, they were ready to film. The scene is composed of 7 shots. Let's break them down and take a look at each one. The crew would show up at 8 a.m. and start their setup and lighting. Fred's call time on set was 9 a.m. They left shot 1 for later and began with shot 2 in the room set. So here we see Fred entering the room, turning on the light, taking off his jacket, and sitting in the chair. It's just 38 seconds long. Doesn't look like much is going on, does it? There's no dancing. And yet, it took 6 takes just to get this. 3 of the takes were discarded because of the room lights not coming up when Fred mimes turning on the light switch. it was really hard to get those big studio lights to flick on perfectly in sync. I think the other 2 discarded takes might have been because Fred had to place his coat and hat to perfectly match the fixed duplicates that had already been built and would be swapped in once the set started rotating. Do you see the harsh, obvious shadows on the back wall? Normally, film sets use backfill lights to reduce those. The lights are mounted out of sight above the fake set walls or off to the side. But remember the shoebox idea of this set. This is an entirely enclosed room. There's no way to get light into the room except from the front, where the lights had to be mounted to the rotating rig so that they move with the room and maintain a constant lighting perspective. Anyway, this shot was finished by 9:45. The next shot is the vocal segment, which is performed with the room fixed in normal floor on the bottom position. Fred starts off singing in voiceover, as if we're just hearing his thoughts. Originally, the concept for the piece was going to be a dream sequence, where Fred falls asleep on the chair, and then we see his dream self rising up in double exposure and start dancing. Of course, that would have left his sleeping body in the shot for the entire song and would have looked clumsy, so they wisely dropped the idea. But this unusual construct of using voiceover for the initial singing might have helped audiences accept that the dancing is all in his mind and part of a fantasy concept. If you're familiar with movie camera techniques, you'll be able to tell that they're using a conventional dolly here to move side to side with Fred, while zooming closer and farther as needed for the framing. At this point, the furniture is not bolted down, so Fred can pick up the chair for a few fancy spins. This shot is 1 minute 4 seconds, and is probably the easiest part of the dance, since the room isn't moving. But maybe Fred got complacent rehearsing this section because he just couldn't get a take that he liked. They filmed 5 takes, and Fred vetoed all 5. They reloaded the camera and did another 3 takes. Still no good. After another reset, they did another 2 takes and finally got one where Fred was satisfied. That's 10 takes just for this shot. The last shot before lunch was the very end of the scene. Just 5 seconds of Fred sitting in the chair and gazing at the picture. Would you believe it took them 5 takes to get a satisfactory 5 seconds of footage here? Fred got a 1-hour lunch break at this point. The crew only got 30 minutes. And then it was time to get the room spinning. They were ready to make the longest shot in the number. Fred climbs the wall, goes across the ceiling, down the other side, and back to the easy chair. But they don't just hit you over the head with the gimmick. At first, Fred just starts dancing and we settle back to enjoy the show. A little back and forth, a little leap, and then a little jump up to the chair. He got a good angle on that. And then across the room, and is that jump higher than usual? We just barely have time to register that something feels off, and now our brain is blown. Notice that the camera is moving to keep Fred centered in the frame. The poor camera operator had to do his work while being rotated with the set, upside down and sideways. Let's switch our perspective back to what Fred was doing inside the set. Honestly, the dance moves are not that fancy. This number isn't about Fred's pure dance virtuosity. It's about selling the illusion. The steps that Fred does on the ceiling as he plays with the light fixture are just there to convey his delight at finding that gravity no longer affects him. That chair is supporting a lot of weight there. The picture frame had to be held in place magnetically, so Fred pulls it into his grasp quite firmly, and then does the little move of turning it upside down to match his perspective. This bit of balance on one leg is cleverly done to make it look like he's completely weightless, with his head supporting him upside down on the back of the chair. Go back and compare it in the final shot to see how it looks in camera. His body control is excellent at all times. And finally, the room rotates back to normal orientation, and our eyes adjust with a click. They did an initial take, and then had to re-rig the camera operator's harness to keep him more tightly held in position. The second take was a keeper, though, and they were done with the shot. Now the dance goes back in the other direction, so they had to spin the room the other way. They also changed the camera lens to get a tighter shot on Fred. Look at the difference in how much room is captured from this shot to this shot. This sequence only takes 28 seconds to go across the floor, up the wall, across the ceiling, and onto the opposite wall. Both Fred and the music are really bouncing along through this section, and it doesn't look quite realistic. I played with the timing in my editor and finally decided that the film and music playback are both boosted by a very subtle 9% here. That would be the camera running at a 22 frames per second frame rate instead of the usual 24 frames per second. The music has a key change at the beginning and end of the camera shot, so you don't hear the change in pitch. Here's the same shot at the speed I think they filmed it. To my eyes, Fred's movements seem more natural and connected with gravity. His initial jump in the air takes the right amount of time now, and he's not scrabbling as manically up the wall. When he gets up to the ceiling, his seated spin is now at a more reasonable speed, and he isn't as frantic as he moves back and forth. The leap from the ceiling to wall at the end to account for the final 90 degrees of rotation seems like it matches gravity. This 28-second shot required 5 takes to get one that Fred was moderately satisfied with. But then he asked for one more go at it, so they reloaded the camera and shot one more take. The shot ends in a very strange place, right in the middle of a dance move. Fred is kicking his legs in the air while lying on his back on the right wall, then he goes to stand up and it's a new shot. Why is that? I think it's a combination of changing the camera speed back to normal frame rate and resetting to spin the room in the other direction. At this point, Fred was too tired to complete the final shot of the dance, so they moved out to the hallway set and filmed him crossing the hotel corridor to enter his room at the beginning of the scene. That ended the shooting day at 5:20 p.m. The next morning, September 8th, Fred was on set again at 9 a.m. for a quick run-through of the final shot and hitching the intrepid cameraman back in his rig. They had to pick it up from Fred lying on his back on the right wall, perfectly matching his position from the previous day, with the camera framing, costuming, and lighting held exactly the same as the day before, so the shots could be edited together smoothly. The rest of the 51-second shot has Fred really exploring the full space of the room, as the dance turns into much more of a conventional tap number, with the tap sounds dubbed in prominently. Once again, Astaire moves effortlessly with the transitions from ceiling to wall, and later the wall to floor, as each part of the set rotates under him. He eventually ends up back in normal viewing mode, and everything snaps back into our usual frame of reference, as he grabs the magical picture frame that inspired his fantasy. Then he moves over to the chair against the back wall to match up to the concluding shot they had filmed the prior day. They shot 2 takes initially, and then had to take a 20-minute break to repair a mechanical problem on the set. One more take after that, and they had the number in the can by 9:52 a.m. The final piece of business was 45 minutes of still shots on the set. These would be used for publicity, technical reference, and library archives. Everybody was done by 10:45. The legacy of this dance sequence has lasted for years, inspiring filmmakers and performers in many different movies and television shows. Here's a shot from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. He used the same filming technique, with the camera mounted to a rotating rig to make it look like the spaceship flight attendant is walking up the wall with her magnetic boots in a gravity-free environment. This sequence, filmed in 1966, remains one of the most perfectly shot examples of the rotating room technique. Kubrick also used the technique in other parts of the film. You might be familiar with the dream sequence hallway fight in Christopher Nolan's 2010 movie Inception. He used the same rotating room technical setup to let the actors carry their fight across the walls and ceiling of the set. And then, of course, there are the direct dance homages. When Lionel Richie filmed his 1986 music video for Dancing on the Ceiling, he hired Stanley Donen to direct it. Donen directed Astaire's original dance sequence in Royal Wedding. The TV show Glee also paid homage to the dance in 2013, this time using the original song, but electing to make their video look more like the old RKO Fred and Ginger movies from the black and white era. More recently, Billie Eilish used the technique on Saturday Night Live in 2019 for a live performance of her song Bad Guy. And MGM wasn't done with the song either. 2 years after Royal Wedding, they reused the music one more time for the movie Torch Song. Here's a little clip of Joan Crawford and director-choreographer Charles Walters dancing to the same music Fred did. It all came from a 1934 tune and a 5-minute scene shot in 1950. You're All the World to Me lives on as a lasting testament to the inventiveness and artistry of Fred Astaire and the movie magic created by the Freed unit at MGM.